They thought she was weak. They thought her silence was an admission of guilt. For 3 days, Grace sat in that cold courtroom, watching her billionaire ex-husband and his ruthless lawyer tear her life apart with lies. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just watched. Everyone, the jury, the gallery, even her own counsel, thought it was over. But they didn't know that Grace wasn't silent because she was afraid. She was silent because she was waiting for the one specific question that would bring the entire empire crashing down. When Judge Holloway finally asked it, the answer didn't just end a marriage, it destroyed a legacy. You won't believe what she was holding back. The mahogany doors of courtroom 4B in the Superior Court of Seattle felt heavy, not just with wood and brass, but with the suffocating weight of inevitable defeat. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that seemed to vibrate against the tension in the room. Howard Archibald adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. He didn't look like a man fighting for his assets. He looked like a man who had already bought the victory and was just waiting for the receipt. At 42, Howard was the golden boy of the tech pharmaceutical industry, a man whose smile had graced the cover of Forbes and whose handshake was rumored to be worth millions. Sitting beside him was his attorney, Arthur Danton, a man known in legal circles as the Butcher. Danton didn't just win cases, he eviscerated the opposition until there was nothing left but dust and regret. And on the bench behind them sat Vanessa Howard's fiancé, 24 years old, impeccably dressed in a modest cream suit that screamed innocent stepmother, clutching a designer purse with white-knuckled anticipation. On the other side of the aisle sat Grace. She wore a simple grey dress that had seen better days, her hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. She looked tired, not the frantic, hysterical exhaustion of a woman scorned, but the deep, bone-weary fatigue of someone who had been swimming against a current for too long. Her hands rested folded on the table, still as stone. "Mr. Danton, you may proceed with your closing arguments regarding the custody arrangement," Judge Holloway said, peering over his spectacles. The judge was a stern man, nearing 70, who had zero patience for theatrics, yet his courtroom had become a theater of cruelty for the past week. Danton stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Thank you, Your Honor. The facts here are indisputable. My client, Mr. Archibald, provides a stable, affluent, and intellectually stimulating environment for his children. He has the resources, the time, and the dedication." Danton walked slowly toward the jury box, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The respondent, on the other hand, Grace. While we sympathize with her current financial struggles brought on, I might add, by her own lack of ambition and questionable investments, we cannot ignore the instability, the emotional volatility. Howard nodded solemnly, looking down at the table as if pained by the truth. It was a perfect performance. "We have heard testimony from the nannies," Danton continued, gesturing vaguely. "We have heard from the house staff. Mrs. Archibald, excuse me. Ms. Corey has been described as distant, distracted, perhaps even negligent. Is this the environment for 2 young children? A small apartment in a questionable district with a mother who refuses to move on." Grace didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead at the Great Seal of the state of Washington, hanging above the judge's head. In the gallery, whispers rippled through the onlookers. The press was there, hungry for the fall of a socialite. They had already written the headlines, "Archibald Victory. Inevitable, sad end for the quiet wife." "She hasn't said a word," Vanessa whispered to her friend in the second row, loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "It's practically an admission. She knows she's unfit. Howard leaned over to Danton as the lawyer returned to the table. Wrap it up. I have a board meeting at 4. It's already done, Howard, Danton murmured, shuffling his papers. Look at her. She's broken. But Grace wasn't broken. She was counting. The afternoon session dragged on. Grace's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Sarah Jenkins, looked out of her depth. Sarah was young, earnest, and completely overwhelmed by the mountain of fabricated evidence Danton had dumped on her desk 3 days prior. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly as she stood up. My client loves her children. The accusations of negligence are based entirely on the testimony of staff currently on Mr. Archibald's payroll. That is a clear conflict of interest. Objection, Danton barked, not even bothering to stand up fully. Relevance. The witnesses were under oath. Sustained. Judge Halloway sighed, rubbing his temples. Ms. Jenkins, unless you have concrete evidence refuting the household staff's claims, move on. Sarah looked down at Grace, desperation in her eyes. Grace, you have to give me something. You told me you had a plan. We're losing everything here. The alimony, the house, the kids. He's destroying you. Grace turned her head slowly. Her eyes were a striking, piercing green, and for the first time in days, they held a spark. Not yet, Sarah. Wait for the finances. The finances, Sarah hissed. We've gone over the finances. He's hidden it all in shell companies. We can't prove it without a forensic accountant, and the judge denied our request for more time. Just wait, Grace said softly. The focus of the trial shifted to the division of assets. This was Howard's playground. He had built an empire, and he had ensured that on paper he was nearly destitute. Howard took the stand. He looked the picture of humble success. Mr. Archibald, Danton asked smoothly, can you explain to the court the current state of your liquid assets? Howard sighed, a tragic expression on his face. It's been a hard year for the market. The pharmaceutical sector took a hit. Most of my wealth is tied up in stock that I legally cannot sell for another 5 years. My liquid cash, it's minimal. Barely enough to cover the legal fees and the maintenance of the properties. I've offered Grace a generous settlement of $5,000 a month, which I think is more than fair considering the company's fragility. $5,000 a month? It was an insult. It wouldn't even cover rent in the school district where their children attended. And what of the offshore accounts Ms. Corey alluded to in her initial filing? Danton asked, setting up the spike. Howard laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Fiction. Pure fantasy. I am an American businessman. I pay my taxes. I keep my money where I can see it. Grace has always had a vivid imagination. I think she's confusing my business trips to the Caymans with banking trips. I went there to scout locations for a retreat center. Nothing more. Judge Halloway nodded, taking notes. He looked at Grace. She was staring at Howard. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers were tapping a rhythm on the table. Tap, tap, tap. Do you wish to cross-examine Ms. Jenkins? The judge asked. Sarah stood up, looking at her notes. She opened her mouth, but Grace's hand shot out, gripping Sarah's wrist. No. Grace said, her voice clear and startlingly loud in the quiet room. Judge Halloway frowned. Ms. Corey, you are speaking out of turn. But are you instructing your counsel to decline cross-examination? I am, Grace said. She stood up. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she seemed to loom over the defense table. Actually, Your Honor, I would like to speak for myself now. Danton chuckled. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. She has counsel. I have the right to address the court regarding the welfare of my children and the validity of these financial claims. Grace said, her voice steady. And I believe Mr. Archibald has forgotten one very small, very important detail about our marriage. Howard rolled his eyes. Here we go. The hysterics. Judge Holloway looked intrigued. He was bored of Danton's slick maneuvering. He wanted to see what the quiet woman in grey had to say. Very well, but tread carefully, Miss Corey. This is a court of law, not a therapy session. What is this detail? Grace walked around the table. She didn't walk toward the witness stand. She walked toward the center of the room, directly in front of the judge, turning her back on Howard. The detail, Grace said, is that before I was a housewife and before I was a mother, Mr. Archibald seems to have forgotten what I did for a living. Howard frowned. He actually had to think about it. He had met Grace at a charity gala 10 years ago. She was volunteering. He assumed she came from old money or was just a social climber. He never really asked. I was an archivist, Grace said. For the State Department. Danton scoffed. And this is relevant how you filed papers. Congratulations. An archivist specializing in forensic data recovery and encrypted communications. Grace corrected her voice, dropping an octave, becoming colder. I didn't just file papers. I found things that people tried very hard to delete. The room went silent. Howard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. For 10 years. Grace continued, pacing slowly. I played the role Howard wanted. The quiet wife. The trophy. I let him think I didn't understand how his business worked. I let him think I was too busy with the children to notice when he changed his passwords. I let him think I was stupid. She turned to face Howard. But I have a photographic memory, Howard, and I have a habit of backing up hard drives. Objection! Danton roared, jumping to his feet. This is ambushing. There is no evidence submitted. Actually, Grace interrupted, pulling a small black USB drive from the pocket of her grey dress. I submitted this to the bailiff this morning, under seal marked for emergency review, regarding perjury. Judge Holloway's eyebrows shot up. He looked at the bailiff, who nodded and handed a manila envelope to the bench. You stayed quiet, Judge Holloway noted, opening the envelope. You let him lie under oath. I needed him to confirm it, Grace said. I needed him to state on the record, under penalty of perjury, that the Cayman accounts didn't exist. Because if I had shown this earlier, he would have settled. He would have spun it. But now he has committed a felony in front of you. Howard's face went pale. He leaned toward Danton. What is on that drive? I don't know, Danton hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. You told me she was a nobody. Judge Holloway plugged the drive into his laptop. The courtroom waited. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. The judge clicked a few files. His eyes widened. He adjusted his glasses. He scrolled and scrolled. He looked up, his face thunderous. Miss Archibald, the judge said, his voice dangerously low. According to these bank statements, which seem to be authenticated by the bank's own digital signature keys, you have $75 million sitting in an account in the name of Vanessa Properties, LLC. The gallery gasped. All eyes turned to Vanessa. She shrieked, dropping her designer bag. I didn't know. He just asked me to sign some papers. Sit down, Danton snapped at her. But that's not the question that matters, Grace said, cutting through the chaos. The money is just money. You can sanction him for that. But there is something else on that drive, Your Honor. Folder 3. The audio files. Howard stood up. Stop this. This is illegal recording, spousal privilege. Not in a one-party consent state when the recording captures the commission of a crime involving a minor, Grace said calmly. Judge Holloway held up a hand, silencing Howard. Mr. Archibald, sit down, or I will have you shackled. Ms. Corey, what is the unexpected question you mentioned in your filing? Grace took a deep breath. This was it. The moment she had waited 3 hellish days for. Ask him, Grace said, pointing a shaking finger at her ex-husband. Ask him where he was on the night of October the 14th, the night our son Leo ended up in the emergency room with a broken arm. Howard froze. He looked like a deer in headlights. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. October 14th, Judge Holloway asked, looking at the timeline. The report says the child fell down the stairs while under the care of the nanny. Ask him, Grace repeated. Judge Holloway looked at Howard. Mr. Archibald, where were you on the night of October 14th? Howard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Danton. Danton looked away. I was at a gala, the Metcalf charity dinner. Howard stammered. There are photos. Grace shook her head. Play the file, Your Honor. File named October 14th. Baby monitor. Judge Holloway clicked the file. The sound of static filled the courtroom. Then a door slamming. Then Howard's voice. Not the smooth public voice, but a slurred, angry growl. I told you to get out of my way, you little brat. A child's cry. Leo. Daddy, no, stop. A loud thud. A sickening crack. Silence. Then Vanessa's voice on the recording. Howard! Oh my God, you pushed him. He's not moving. Howard, we have to call 911. Howard's voice again, cold and sober. No. Call the nanny. Tell her if she doesn't say he fell, she'll never work in this town again. Fix this, Vanessa. I'm going to the gala. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was deafening. It was the sound of a life ending. Vanessa was sobbing into her hands. Howard was gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. Judge Holloway slowly closed the laptop. He took off his glasses. He looked at Howard with a look of pure disgust that transcended his judicial role. Mr. Archibald, the judge said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. I have heard enough. The silence that had gripped the courtroom shattered like a glass pane dropped from a skyscraper. This is a fabrication. Howard Archibald screamed, his face a mask of contorted rage. He lunged toward the defense table, sweeping a stack of files onto the floor. She manipulated the audio. That is AI-generated. I demand a forensic analysis. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel down. The sound cracking through the air like a gunshot. Bang, bang, bang. Sit down, Mr. Archibald. The judge roared, his voice projecting with a terrifying authority that made the gallery flinch. You are in a court of law, not a boardroom where you can bully your way into submission. Arthur Danton, the butcher, looked as though he had swallowed a live coal. He was a man who prided himself on reading the room, on knowing when to push and when to fold.